be a very, very good morning, good afternoon, and good evening across time zones, and welcome to everybody joining online and across virtual networks. Thank you very much for investing your time with us here today. My name is Erica Muritz, all the way from Windhoek, the Undp Accelerator Lab Namibia, and I'm very privileged to be your moderator for the next 70 minutes. Continuing the conversations with the Istanbul Innovation Day 2021, the UNDP Regional Bureau Africa's contribution is an innovation, the informal economy, and the One Africa market, where the focus is going to be on stitching the tapestry for sustainable development. The symbolism of a tapestry conveys a simple but unique message that the informal sector in Africa, a sector which is rich in color and diversity as well as potential, constitutes a greater share of the informal employment than wage employment. According to the ILO, it accounts for as much as 53% of non-agricultural employment in sub-Saharan Africa and 31% in North Africa. So therefore, this high-level discussion seeks to build on the key innovators and homegrown solutions that the continent has showcased at the height of the COVID-19 pandemic, displaying Africa's resilience and capabilities to innovate in the face of adversity, with specific focus on the informal economy. So further, this session is going to interrogate the interface amongst innovation, the informal economy, and a One Africa market in leveraging the African Continental Free Trade Area, which has been signed by 54 of the African Union's 55 members. So before we dive into the panel introductions, please allow me to briefly give you a snapshot of what to expect this afternoon. We will be starting off with a 2-minute video to set the tone after the official opening and framing remarks from our UNDP administrator and assistant administrator. We will go right into a focused time box set of questions, which will be then directed to each of the panelists to reflect on and to answer. The second part of the conversations will then take the form of a 15-minute Q&A session, which we will then summarize from the chat to expedite time. And the last part will conclude with a 2-minute reflection and a parting message from all the participants, starting with the UNDP administrator. In terms of housekeeping, we're very fortunate to have French and English interpretation services. And I would like to humbly request that when selecting your language of choice to consistently stick with it while muting the other. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce the video, which is really a 2-minute video, anytime right now. Thank you. Over.
During the peak of the COVID-19 pandemic, new and repurposed homegrown African innovations were key to mitigating the socio-economic fallout in Africa and beyond. Africa does not have a shortage of innovators, but there is an innovation gap and a need for intentional approaches to development. We must recognize what these innovators mean for Africa, deepen our commitment to homegrown solutions, and amplify their ingenuity. Ingenuity is especially evident in the continent's informal market, where much has been done, even with minimal means. The informal market makes up 70% of Africa's economy, yet it is 25 times lower in productivity than the formal economy. Creating the innovative infrastructure necessary to boost impact for the efforts and fostering investments are essential. Trade agreements like the AFCFTA have the ability to spur innovation that increases value, creating a multiplier effect on markets on the continent. Innovation, the informal economy, and the One African market accelerate inclusive growth in Africa. How do we stitch this tapestry for sustainable development?
Thank you very much. That was a beautiful video. I would like to take the opportunity to now introduce our esteemed panel members. And in observing the protocol, we'd like to begin with our high-level guests. We're very privileged that Her Excellency Minister Ursula Owusu Ekuful, the Minister of Communications and Digitalizations of Ghana, has accepted our invitation to join this panel discussion. Honorable Minister is a lawyer, women's rights activist, and a Ghanaian parliamentarian. She's been the Minister of Communication for Ghana since 2017, and she's been instrumental in instituting a number of measures to bridge the digital divide to ensure efficient connectivity for Ghanaians. Welcome, Honorable Minister, Her Excellency. Next up, I would like to introduce His Excellency Secretary General Juan Mene, the first Secretary General of the African Continental Free Trade Agreement Secretariat based in Accra, Ghana. Excellency, he is a South African national, and His Excellency Secretary General Mene previously served as the head of mission to the World Trade Organization for South Africa and later chaired the Committee on International Trade and Financial Services at the World Trade Organization. Welcome, Your Excellency. I'm going to move on to introduce, and it is an equal privilege to introduce Mr. Achim Steiner, the Undersecretary General and UNDP Administrator since June 2017. And after reading and seeing the exciting news over the weekend, I can only indicate that it is a great privilege to be under his leadership for another term. So congratulations, sir. As Vice Chair of the UNDP Sustainable Development Group, which unites 40 entities of the UN system, Mr. Steiner has been a global leader in sustainable development, climate resilience, and international cooperation for over 3 decades. He has worked tirelessly to champion sustainability, economic growth, and equally for the vulnerable, and has been a vocal advocate for the Sustainable Development Goals. I am also equally honored to introduce Ms. Ahuna Ezekanwa, the Assistant Secretary General, Assistant Administrator UNDP, and Director of the Regional Bureau for Africa. Ms. Ezekanwa has many years of distinguished service with the United Nations, most recently as UN Resident Coordinator and UNDP Resident Representative in Ethiopia since 2015. It is a privilege to have you on the panel. I'm also very happy to introduce Ms. Natalie Jabangwe. And Natalie is the youngest former Chief Executive Officer of EcoCash, the mobile money service of EcoNet Wireless. It is a leading wireless telephone company in Zimbabwe. And EcoCash is the second largest mobile financial service company on the African continent, serving more than 6 million individuals. Ms. Jabangwe, who was also a 2017 Fellow of the Archbishop Desmond Tutu Leadership Fellowship Program, and she was nominated among the 100 Young Global Leaders of the World Economic Forum in 2018. In the same year, the United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres appointed her to the United Nations Task Force on Digital Financing of Sustainable Development Solutions and is part of UNDP's Influences for Development group. It is equally exciting to introduce Miss Iria Jonah, and she is the founder of NAM Oceanic Kelp in Namibia. Iria describes herself to be an innovative agripreneur with an academic background in fisheries and aquatic science. NAM Oceanic Kelp processes seaweed into poultry feed and animal feed supplements. So as part of exploring additional prospects, Ms. Jonah has now joined forces with a new startup in establishing a kelp farm north of Luderitz, harvesting giant kelp for further processing into biostimulants and animal feed. Last but not least, I am very thrilled to introduce Mr. Vidal Kenmu, who is a former British Royal Army officer who traded in his military know-how for shoe soles. Although he still consults for the army, Mr. Kenmu spends most of his time in Douala, Cameroon. He makes and he cuts and polishes beautiful luxury footwear. Mr. Kenmu learned the craft in 2013, and he's been making shoes since 2015, and in perfecting the art, founded Shoes by Vidal in 2016. So with this wealth of expertise and this excellent lineup, I would like now to humbly request our UNDP administrator, Mr. Achim Steiner, to deliver his opening remarks. It's over to you, sir.
Thank you, Erika, and it's good to meet you as I engage in these Istanbul Innovation Days around the world. I get to know and meet some of our new colleagues, particularly those who joined the Accelerator Lab. So Erika, thank you for moderating us. Minister, dear Secretary General, dear colleague Juan, Natalie, a dear friend with whom I worked so closely on the SG's task force, but also to Ms. Jonah and to Mr. Kenmo, thank you for joining us for this Istanbul Innovation Days Africa Dialogue on innovation, the informal economy, and the One Africa market. And in the brief video that you saw already, you can see that not only is there extraordinary momentum around innovation and that new One Africa market across the continent. With our panelists today, I hope we can look a little bit into the future, even though these are unprecedented and challenging times, and optimism sometimes is a currency hard to come by. But I think with all of you, that is precisely what we can hopefully bring to the discussion today. As you all know, digital tools and systems are transforming our lives, faster for some than others, but causing the greatest disruption to our ways of working, of interacting and governing, probably since the advent of the industrial age. Look, for instance, at one fact that always amazes me, which is that over 90% of the data that exists in the world today was created just in the past 2 years. Indeed, the world has undergone even greater flux now due to the COVID-19 pandemic, which is still raging across the world, as we can see daily on our news channels. To mount the strongest response possible to the pandemic in Africa, the United Nations family is working with key partners like the African Union to help coordinate response and recovery efforts with member states across the continent, but also civil society organizations and business leaders. With global supply chains disrupted by lockdowns, limited air and cargo transportation, and access to medical supplies curtailed by a surge in international demand, Africa searched and had to search for homegrown solutions. Supporting these solutions became a vital focus for UNDP over the past year as we led the UN socioeconomic response to the pandemic together with our country team colleagues and our resident coordinators. Some of these eye-opening solutions that we then discovered and supported were highlighted in our Africa Innovates publication. They range from a robot that is diagnosing COVID-19 infections in Egypt to a foot-operated hand-washing machine invented by a 9-year-old innovator, a young boy in Kenya, to sequencing the virus genomes in Ghana. And the UNDP Accelerator Labs network is helping to give communities the space to innovate, to experiment, to share solutions, and even to fail and try again. And as Minister Wuster said, as we were chatting before we started our session, to learn from one another by looking more carefully at the ingenuity of each other. In Uganda, for example, we launched a new e-commerce platform with Jumaya Food to keep small, medium-scale enterprises in the informal trade sector afloat as the country went into lockdown. Or in Tanzania, the labs assembled a quick-thinking team to exploit the potential of 3D printing to produce much-needed personal protective equipment. There are currently 35 UNDP Accelerator Labs now operating across our teams in Africa. Many of the solutions they will surface and scale up will focus on the confluence between innovation and the informal economy in a One African market era. Look, for instance, to the complexity of the waste sector. There are many very specific innovations in the informal sector that individually recycle different waste products for valuable new products, ranging from floor tiles to roads to roofing. Collectively, these innovations will have a massive impact on the future of waste management. And I myself have a very vivid memory of living in my 10 years in Kenya in a very famous waste dump called the Dondora Waste Dump, where unfortunately recycling is indeed happening with virtually every material being extracted from that dump, but under absolutely inhumane conditions. It is the poorest who have to work on the top of those dumps, when we could put in place a recycling infrastructure that would allow thousands of jobs to be undertaken in a healthier and more equitable way. That is part of the recycling economy that I think we all strive to build. Micro, small, and medium-sized enterprises, which account for 90% of all businesses on the continent and 86% of all jobs in the informal sector, were especially hard hit during the pandemic. These informal workers had limited means to cope with the economic, social, and health impacts of the pandemic. Overnight, millions of people across the world were confined to their homes as lockdowns took effect, unable to travel to receive social protection payments traditionally paid in cash. In countries like Nigeria, UNDP used the power of digital finance to support and partner sometimes life-saving electronic cash transfer programs. We are ideally placed to offer this kind of support given that we had a digital UNDP strategy already in place, and we are a live learning organization across 170 countries where new ideas are born and tested every day. UNDP is also deepening its partnership with the International Labour Organization, our sister agency. That includes supporting governments on the African continent to explore innovative social protection options for informal workers. Complementing this, the new UNDP Borderland Center in Kenya will serve the 270 million people living in Africa's border regions. It centers on a recognition that for people living in border regions, life can be very different. The capital sometimes is very far away. For instance, informal cross-border trading is estimated to represent as much as 40% of Africa's regional trade. In this context, we will roll out innovation challenges with our Accelerator Labs network to quickly identify locally driven, scalable, and cost-effective solutions to trading communities. This process will be driven by key groups like women, who represent 70% of cross-border traders in Africa, a statistic not known to many. Those solutions could involve everything from making agriculture production more efficient to rolling out renewable energy solutions. And there is incredible potential to create new green jobs through carbon capture, energy trading, and environmental protection in regions such as the Sahel, the Horn of Africa, and the Great Lake border clusters. We also understand the need for systemic change. We have signed a new strategic agreement with the African Continental Free Trade Area Secretariat. And again, Juan, thank you so much for the very proactive engagement and partnership that we have developed to promote trade as a stimulus for Africa's socioeconomic recovery, now, not just into the future. As Africa trades more with itself, we will examine crucial issues such as small, medium-scale export competitiveness. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues, the start of the African Continental Free Trade Area, a market of some 1.2 billion people, will open up unprecedented opportunities for people living on the continent, and indeed for everyone. We now need to make the connections between this free trade area and the entrepreneurs and innovators. It comes at a time when Africa has been the global center of a once-in-a-generation surge of homegrown innovation, and you will hear a lot more in a moment. The challenge now is to sustain this incredible surge of innovation across the continent, giving innovators and entrepreneurs the oxygen they need to create new solutions. And I'm sure we will explore what that oxygen should involve, because it is many different things that facilitate that. And again, to Minister Oesler, we look forward to the story of Ghana also, that has just made another big splash in the news, building over years an ecosystem for innovation. That may involve updating laws and regulations. It may include areas like making it easier to register a new company. And these innovators will require much more long-term financial investment from both governments and the local financial and international community. Indeed, given that many of the solutions will involve digital disruption, we need to do much more for the 70% of Africa which is still offline, though expanding access to affordable broadband. Let me close by saying that these new grassroots solutions that we are learning from every day will be vital to our efforts to tackle climate change, protect our natural world, and tackle poverty and inequality, building from the bottom up to transform the future trajectory of development for the continent, but also worldwide. Therefore, the entire UN system will be on hand to support communities and informal workers across the African continent to better leverage their extraordinary ingenuity, adaptability, and economic potential, so that they can play a full part in shaping that greener, more sustainable future, and in the short term, the recovery that we're all striving for. Thank you again for joining us, and I hope we will have a fascinating session together. Back to you, Erika. Thank you.
Thank you very much, esteemed administrator, Mr. Achim Steiner. We indeed live in very complex times, but equally they're also exciting times. And it is a privilege for the Undp Accelerator Labs, all 35 of us, to be able to partner with unusual partners across the continent, particularly supporting women, the youth, to scale innovations across the continent. Thank you very much, sir. At this point, I would like to invite the Assistant Administrator and Director of the UNDP Regional Bureau for Africa, Ms. Ahuna Eziokonwa, to deliver her framing remarks on the theme in the context of Africa. Ms. Eziokonwa, over to you, ma'am.
Ahuna, you're still on mute, sorry.
Sorry, yeah, I'm trying to unmute.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, wonderful. Really, thank you to our moderator for starting us off, and a big thank you also to my boss for setting the tone. Excellencies, let me pay my respects to the minister. We already spoke earlier, and of course to our Secretary General and the leading players in innovation ecosystem and dear participants who have joined us. A big thank you for joining us today for a very important conversation, as we just heard from the administrator. You know, some scholars some years back ruled that Africa exists only to the extent that it is acted upon. Well, I think that the world of innovation is clearly proving them wrong, firmly establishing the continent as an actor and an influencer. You know, there is a new story on this continent, and it is fast moving away from being useful to the world as that region that only generated sensational reports of human suffering. Well, if reporters today are smart, they should begin to notice an equally, if not more, sensational stories of innovation, invention, and entrepreneurship on the continent that we witness today. And COVID-19 further opened our eyes to this new story. As we saw, and the word the administrator used is ingenuity, incredible ingenuity of Africa's entrepreneurs and innovators, as we will hear shortly, who saw problems as opportunities and sprang into action, devising a host of digital solutions in digital health tracking and other e-health services, in e-governance, very important, in digital solutions for food delivery, digital systems for urban mobility, in digital education tools, digital commerce, and a lot more. And we have also seen hard-hitting reality of low investments in Africa's digital infrastructure, but all of this happened despite that. We know, for instance, as UNCTAD has told us, that Africa has the highest average cost of internet access. Only 1 in 5 in LDCs has access to the internet. And according to ITU, on connectivity gaps, the significant gaps within countries based on levels of income, education, gender, and geographical location are most accentuated within least developed countries, where the urban-rural divide points to 89% of urban households having a mobile phone compared with 63% in rural areas. There is also, of course, a gender gap, which we must fight, observed in a lot of reports that we have seen. This yawning gap in the widening digital divide has exacerbated inequality during the COVID pandemic. as most of Africa's children are still, some still not able to go to school, where there are severe lockdown measures in place, and unable, of course, to migrate to digital learning. So even as we celebrate this ingenuity today, it's important to reflect on some of the downsides of that are created by the digital divide. In this sense, we know that digital tools and their absence have put into sharp focus the new meaning of being left behind, an area that requires priority investment. Yet, despite all of this limited access to technology, we have seen Africans innovate immensely. Stories Undp has featured, as you heard from the administrator, half of the world's labor force will be African by 2050. And over 2/3 of Africans are young people below the age of 30. And this generation of young Africans is by far the best educated, the healthiest, and also the smartest, as we reap the dividends of the past few decades focused on social sector spending on education and health, but also with digital possibilities that they now have at their disposal. And the One Africa market is $1.2 billion. It's a 1.2 billion people strong market and over $1 trillion of consumer spending. And we will soon hear from the Secretary General the significance of this. So imagine, if you will, a world in which this massive and youthful African labor force is not clamoring to find its way to Europe or America's shores on boats and stowaway cargo holds in search of opportunities and a decent life, but rather aspires and sees itself as the generation that will transform Africa through the power of creativity, but also of innovation, of entrepreneurship, not only influencing change in Africa, but influencing change in a world that desperately needs it. Imagine what a different world we would have if that were to be the case. An important question for us to consider is how, and we know the what now. So let us focus on this how to facilitate the move of these powerful innovations to the next level so that we can foster value creation, capture the production of the goods and services needed in a One Africa market. Most in Africa are not asking for lessons, they're asking for equity. And I remain convinced that through continuous, intentional, and diverse partnerships, we can thrive to move these powerful innovations to the next level so that they can foster a vibrant, inclusive, and beneficial digital economy and industry for the production of goods and services needed in this One Africa market. It can also usher a new era for Africa, where its innovative prowess can, for the first time, ensure that Africans are creators of digital technologies themselves and that they are responsive to their context, and not that users of these tools, not just users of these tools, in most cases, that is stated right now. I personally hope that we will be consistent with the Africa values of Ubuntu, even as we pursue digital solutions. And I hope that our conversation today takes us that much closer to answers to this important question, so that maximizing opportunities in AFCFTA can become the very lived reality of Africa's women, youth, and men as well. And I really look forward to an engaging conversation. Back to you, moderator.
Thank you very, very much, Ms. Eziokonwa, for those inspiring and really fundamental questions that have set the tone and framed our conversations going forward. I'm to try and manage time a little bit better. And I'd like to move on to the Secretary General of the AFC-FTA Secretariat, Your Excellency, Mene. I'd like to direct a question to you, perhaps just to respond to the conversations that we've been having up until now. The question would be, how can innovators in the informal economy take advantage of opportunities in the One Africa market? Your Excellency, over to you.
Thank you very much. The UNDP Administrator, Your Excellency, Achim, Steiner, Honorable Minister, Madam Director and Assistant UNDP Administrator, it's a pleasure to join you this morning, and I congratulate you on this initiative. Very, very difficult times that you are convening this session in, and also to the distinguished panelists who will be part of this conversation this morning. Again, I'm happy to be part of this conversation. We have, as I keep saying, we have a very unique opportunity as Africans through this African Continental Free Trade Area, which is a market of 1.2 billion people, very young and growing population, as Madam Director indicated, and a combined GDP of 3.4 trillion United States dollars. And what we have been successful in doing with a partnership that we have with the UNDP is to ask ourselves really fundamental questions about how this can be an extraordinary trade agreement. How do we move away from trade agreements that leave behind the typical trade agreements that we know in the past have left behind very, very important segments of our society? Innovators, the informal sector, women in trade, and young people. So we now have a legal instrument that can really be the baseline for a convergence of all of these ideas that are geared towards Africa's innovation, developing Africa's capacity for repurposing the business sector in light of COVID-19. And there are already examples of ingenuity, as the director, Madam Director said, as well as Achim said. There are already signals of ingenuity on the African continent. The real question is, how do we anchor that in an expansive market as we have in Africa? Let me give you an example. For the last few years, Africa has been at the cutting edge of mobile banking technology. And this is something that has been happening actually even before many countries in the developed world became as innovative when it comes to mobile banking technology. We know of in Kenya, we know M-Pesa. We know in the country that I live in, mobile money, which we call Momo. There are various other technological advances and innovations that have happened in the last few years across the African continent. We know also that in some parts of the continent, women who are farmers of cut flower use technology, digital platforms to access markets around the world. We also know that there are young Africans across this continent, whether in Lagos, in Kigali, in Johannesburg. There are young Africans who are at the cutting edge of technological innovation, particularly in respect of e-commerce and digital trade. All of these things have been happening in the absence of a common platform that is provided to facilitate trade, innovation, and the linkages between trade and innovation on the African continent. So we now have a very unique opportunity through this agreement to bring all of that together, to make all of these innovations, advancements that have been happening, to make them converge into under the framework, within the framework of this common market, which is the African Continental Free Trade Area. It offers a number of things. It offers scale. So if you are now an innovator, you now have an opportunity to expand into a market of 1.2 billion people. You have an opportunity to expand outside of your region, outside of your country, and confront the African market in its entirety. There's no region on the African continent that can trade itself out of poverty and out of the condition that it is in. There's no single country in Africa that can innovate itself out of poverty. If we want Africa to innovate herself out of the condition that we are in today, we will not be able to do it as silos, as West Africa, as East Africa, as North Africa, and Southern Africa. We will need to embark on a common platform of innovation under a single set of rules for trade, for investment, for research and development. This is what the African Continental Free Trade Area offers. Now, the emphasis is going to be on young people and women. And I'm very happy about the partnership that we have with UNDP. And UNDP, of course, have the expertise and the experience in terms of development and affirmative action for women in business and trade and young people. And I want us as the AfCFTA Secretariat to leverage on the experience and the success of UNDP in bringing that they've had over the decades to bring together segments of society that have been left out of the fold, mainstream economic fold in the past. And so this partnership between UNDP, AfCFTA Secretariat is, again, as I said earlier, a very, very unique opportunity for us to move beyond the speeches, beyond the platitudes that we've made over the years, and to come up with a really concrete program of action for how we are going to spur on creativity, ingenuity, innovation on the back of the AfCFTA Secretariat and the AfCFTA, the agreement itself, rather, not the Secretariat. I have an example that I can cite. As we start to negotiate the protocol on digital trade and e-commerce, what kind of provisions should we craft in the agreement that will encourage innovation? We know, for example, that Senegal today is generating some really transformative ideas around innovation in the pharmaceutical industry. In 2019 alone, Africa imported $15 billion worth of pharmaceutical products because we lack the innovation, the technological know-how, let alone the rules that prohibit this to an extent. Let's leave that aside, the TRIPS rules and some of the global rules, but let's focus on some of the constraints, the intra-Africa constraints that lead us today as Africans to import $15 billion worth of pharmaceutical products in the year or the year 2019 alone. This to me points to the need for us to accelerate Africa's innovation capacity, which will contribute to Africa's industrial development. So the linkage between industrial development and innovation to me is very, very clear. The linkage between digital trade and innovation to me is very, very clear. And of course, all of these things, we now have an opportunity to set the same set of rules, disciplines. We can codify all of this into a single set of rules in the protocol on digital trade and innovation on the African continent. This is what we are offering to the millions and millions of Africans who are innovators, who are at the cutting edge of innovation in their respective fields. This is what we are offering to the informal sector, which we heard correctly, that contributes close to 70% to Africa's GDP, employs over 450 million Africans, and actually, more importantly, the informal sector on the African continent, the drivers are largely women, particularly in communities, business communities that are adjacent along border posts. So we have a unique opportunity to confront this common challenge and to leverage on the AFCFTA to ensure that in the next few years, we don't just keep talking about innovation in Africa in the context of one market, or industrial development in the context of one market, that actually we come up with a very, very concrete program that will lead to specific outcomes for innovators, for the informal sector, for women in trade, for young entrepreneurs. This is what I am very, very excited about the partnership that we have with UNDP. And as you know, when we signed the partnership agreement last month in New York, UNDP was very much generous to provide a grant which will help us as a secretariat to implement some of the programs that are absolutely critical to supporting Africa's innovation, to supporting Africa's industrial development, and of course, to supporting young people and women in trade. So thank you very much again for inviting me, and thank you for the question.
Thank you very much, Excellency Secretary General Mene. My takeaway is that you've talked about the convergence of the industrial trade, digitalization, innovation, and you've underscored the need for collaboration. I believe that that is really setting the tone for the next question, which I would like to give to Your Excellency, Minister Owusu Ekufu. And I'd like to ask the question, from your experience as Minister for Communication and Digitalization, what could national governments do to improve the regulatory and policy frameworks to support innovation in the informal economy so as to promote utilization of opportunities in the One African market? Your Excellency, over to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Eureka. Under Secretary General, Mr. Steiner, Assistant Under Secretary General Huma, Ms. Jabangwe, His Excellency Mr. Wankele of the Continental Free Trade Area, Ms. Kona, Mr. Kemo, Dr. Maritz, and all participants in this forum, good afternoon from where I am in Accra. It's a pleasure to be here with you. And thanks for the question, because that was the thrust of my intervention. Governments have a very key role to play in creating the enabling environment to facilitate the growth of innovation on the continent. We also need to look at assisting in the creation of the digital infrastructure that will enable all of this to ride on. It's not enough just to allow the private sector to take the lead in provision of digital infrastructure, because they're only motivated by profit and where they'll get the maximum returns on their investment. What about the rural areas? What about making it possible for our peasant farmers and petty traders around the country to also engage in this digital ecosystem? Government has a role to play to facilitate connectivity around the continent. And not just that, we need to work hand in hand with private sector players to assist, reduce the regulatory bottlenecks and challenges which impede upon their own, the growth of their own innovative processes. And so from where I sit in Ghana, at the height of the pandemic, we gave free spectrum to all the network operators who needed it to reduce the capacity challenges that they were facing on their networks. As more traffic moved online, we were faced with choked networks, and so it wasn't possible to learn, to do e-commerce, to facilitate e-health, or any of the other conversations that needed to be had during the lockdown period. So we needed to work with them to give them the spectrum that they needed. And I believe Ghana was one of the only countries in the world which actually did that. We're also mandating national roaming. So it doesn't matter which network you're on. If you go to an area where there is no connectivity on your network, you can roam on the next available network so that you can still connect. We've also mandated technology neutrality to facilitate the network operators to also operate, to boost innovation and creativity in this space as well. I'm a key believer in the fact that government can use its purchasing power as the largest procurer of goods and services to facilitate the growth of innovation by utilizing the innovative technologies produced by our own people on a national scale to ensure that whatever they are doing also has national appeal and global appeal. Since 2017, we have prioritized the formalization of our economy and are growing our digital economy systematically. And so we embarked on digital address system, an integrated national ID strategy, and a comprehensive government services platform called the Ghana.gov platform, on which anyone can access government goods and services on an electronic platform. Now, all of these innovations that I mentioned were powered by Ghanaians, developed by Ghanaians. So our national digital property addressing system, our national EID system, and our Ghana.gov services platform are all local innovations, and they're being used nationally. And by so doing, we've created the atmosphere for all innovators to see that if they produce a good enough product, government itself will take it up and utilize it. And it is working seamlessly by encouraging even greater innovation in the country. We have about 26 active technology hubs currently as I speak. The Accra Digital Center hosts one of the most active ones, and the Kumasi Hive is also very, very well known for the many innovations that they're churning out across every sector that we can think of, from health to education to farming services to entertainment, you name it. Even during the COVID pandemic itself, we produced a COVID tracker app, and the Pana Buyers app, which is currently being used across the continent by the African Union and the West African Health Organization itself, which is, has just been signed on by Ghana, I believe Ethiopia, and Kenya, and the rest of ECOWAS is due to sign off. It's a Ghanaian innovation, which is enabling us to certify COVID test results at the point of entry, so that we would reduce the influx of fake test results and all of that, and make it possible for us to open up our airspaces and go back to normality quicker. When we put our minds to it, just like we did with the digital financial services that has already been talked about, mobile money and M-Pesa, and what it has done to revolutionize banking in the world, we can find innovative African solutions to our peculiar challenges, which can have global application. So I'm excited that our entrepreneurs are rising up to the challenge and are producing the solutions that we need. We can also do even more as government and as policymakers to energize this space and make it possible for them to do what they're doing better, by not over-regulating it, but with a light regulatory touch, but putting in place the infrastructure that they need. So when it comes to rural connectivity, government is facilitating the connection of all rural communities across the country, and not just waiting for the private sector to do that, with our rural telephony projects and digital transformation project that we are undertaking. We're also using our network of community ICT centers as digital transformation centers, and we have it across the country. where anyone can go and be trained in basic ICT skills and basic entrepreneurial skills, so that they can also take advantage of the digital technologies that are being rolled out across the country. And so in about 3 years, we're going to train about 20,000 very rural populations in all these kinds of digital skills. And half of that I am passionate about, narrowing the gender digital divide. And so we're taking deliberate steps to include women in all the work that we're doing. So from the Accra Digital Center to our digital transformation centers, 50% of all those who are trained have to be women. And we insist on that being done. We also have a Girls in ICT project that goes above and beyond what the ITU has done and has institutionalized mentorship from females in working in technology. We have an open day where we bring girls from the remotest parts of the country to hang out with women using technology in their daily work. So we demystify the whole space and let them know that they also can contribute. And there are people actually working at the highest levels of the digital space who they can look up to as active role models and aspire to be like. And that's one of the projects that I'm particularly proud of. And so from the remotest parts of this country, we're exposing young junior high school and primary school students to digital technology, coding, and all of that. And they're taking it up as if they were born to it. So if we create the right environment, I've said so on several occasions that because of Africa's demographic dividend, we will provide the manpower for the world within the next 20 to 30 years. If we give our young people the digital skills they need today to be able to compete in the fourth industrial revolution. It is doable. We're seeing it happen around us. And I think it's incumbent on governments around the continent to also stimulate this space and make it possible for our young people to also have a future of hope in the digital world and not just be bystanders. We also have to stimulate giving those who produce the content the microcredit. And I'm excited about the Continental Free Trade Area because I think that it gives us the chance to lift ourselves out of poverty once and for all. And working, Africans have traded across millennia amongst ourselves, walking on foot and sharing whatever we're producing from one part of the continent with the other. Digital technology is what will power the Continental Free Trade Area, and we need to take advantage of it to really connect our systems from logistics, the supply chain, from marketing, instituting the proper standards, and making sure that we have the platform on which our people can trade seamlessly. I think that COVID was a blessing in disguise for the continent. It's shown us in a practical way that when we have to, we can think out of the box and create the solutions that will enable our systems to thrive. We are doing it. When the global supply chains shut down, we produce our own local masks and medical scrubs locally. Sanitizers were impossible to get. We're producing them locally. So I agree with His Excellency Juan that we need to look at the pharmaceutical industry and see how we can produce for ourselves on the continent. And there's nothing better than a challenge to focus people's minds. And so there's a silver lining to this COVID cloud, and we must not waste the pandemic. If we fail to put in place the systems that will enable us to integrate our trade, our logistics chain, our supply chains, I don't know when else we will get a similar opportunity to do it. The time to do it is now. I know our export promotion agency is working with producers around the continent, around the country to help them to produce even more. And they're using our existing social media platforms to trade. And so we can scale it up using e-commerce platforms with our existing payment systems that we have to reach across every sector of the continent with the innovative products that we are producing now. I must thank, governments can't do it alone. Partnerships are critical. They transcend national borders in creating regional platforms for collaboration amongst the private, public, and civil society sectors. And a great example is the Global Haven Partnership that the UNDP is a general sponsor of. Today, this partnership has produced a powerful digital platform that has become a mainstay of Ghana's current battle to prevent the importation of dangerous strains of COVID-19 into the country. In the same way, I commend the ongoing work by the Continental Free Trade Area to create conditions for digital cooperation across markets to advance the single market agenda. The boost to regional value chains should offer vast opportunities for employment creation in higher productivity sectors of the economy and increase the life prospects of the millions of African youth locked in low-earning circumstances at the bottom of the informal sector. We stand ready to do what we can to facilitate this process. And I know that I speak for my colleagues around the continent, but I would urge us all that when we're looking at using technology in health, in education, in trade, we should include the policymakers in digitalization and communications in that conversation. More often than not, the decisions are taken and we are left to scramble around to see how to give effect to it. If we are part of the conversation at inception, we can drive the take-up and the full implementation of it even better by identifying issues such as data governance and ownership of the digital data that we generate that would inure to the benefit of our people. We cannot continue to be hewers of wood and drawers of water on the continent. And digital technology provides the key to unlocking the vast potential of African youth and African innovators. And I'm sure we'll hear from those on this panel about what they are doing. Thank you for the opportunity to contribute to this conversation.
Thank you very much, Your Excellency, Honorable Minister. It is very heartening indeed to learn about Ghana in terms of what government has done to create that enabling environment and address the regulatory bottlenecks and challenges in moving towards a more integrated e-governance system to address these challenges to assist the local innovators. Having heard from the esteemed high-level panelists, I would like to give the opportunity very briefly to our young innovators, starting with Iria Jonah. Iria, you're the founder of NAM Oceanic Kelp. You've transformed seaweed into animal feed, and you've heard the esteemed members of the panel in terms of what has been done. What needs to happen still to support African innovators in reaching accelerated breakthroughs to the next level? I'm going to give you 2 minutes to respond to this. Iria, are you ready? Over to you. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much, Hilka. Good morning. Good afternoon, evening, everyone. That I've seen other innovators go through, and myself in Namibia and some from other countries. And the first one, from my understanding, innovation is you starting something new or improving something that already exists to make it better. And in most cases, innovators find themselves clashing with policies, governmental policies in place, or they are required to have certain rights or permits to operate. And these processes take long. And in most cases, it kills innovation. People end up giving up on their innovation because you end up waiting to get certain rights or certain permits to operate, and you don't get them. That is the truth. And I believe that if policies can be reevaluated to fit new innovations, because some of the policies were formed years ago, it will really help in terms of supporting innovators move forward, or maybe narrow the time it takes for someone to get a specific right, that will also help to save the time and for them to just not lose hope and continue operating. The second one is financial support. You hardly find a bank wanting to give an innovator a loan because that is a risk already. You didn't test your concept. You don't have a proof of your concept that it will work, so it's a risk. So if we can have institutions that can fund innovators that are coming up with great innovations, then I think that can also help innovators move forward. Without money, you can't do anything. Even if we say you have to conduct an environmental impact assessment, you still need money. And most innovators, as the former speaker spoke, they are young, fresh graduates. You don't have money to do all these things. So we need that support already from the beginning. Okay, and then the third point is as innovators, we work in isolation. We have this tendency of believing that, okay, it's my innovation. If I work with someone else, they'll maybe steal my idea, or I won't have enough shares in my company, things like that. So I believe that if we can educate fellow innovators that it's okay to form partnerships, it's okay to look for other people with skills that can complement where you lack, it can help us move forward faster. And because then if you are working in isolation, you cannot accomplish everything at once. So I believe having that education or awareness, creating that awareness among innovators will really help. So overall, looking at the three main challenges I've outlined or I've picked, it will really be great if we can have a support system or a body that can support innovation. Okay, so if we have different stakeholders from different ministries, Ministry of Environment, Ministry of Fisheries, Ministry of Mines, all in this innovation hub, and then we have investors, we have a link to the market, we have a link to, if you want to certify your products, everything is in this innovation hub. It can really help and save a lot of innovators a lot of time to just be running up and down, being pushed from one ministry to the next. Now you need this right, you have to go to the next one. And yeah, so it will really be great if you can have that innovation hub. As the Secretary General said, we need one system in place that can help innovators. If I have my idea, I come to this innovation hub, both stakeholders sit to say, okay, who is involved in this? Who can be involved in this project? Where can we support this innovator? Or how do we help them better? Are they looking for investment? Can we link them up to investments outside the country or wherever? And also, if we have an innovation hub, investors out there, they can also go on the hub and say, okay, in Namibia, on the Namibian Innovation Hub, these are the innovators we have. Am I willing to invest in this type of business? Then they already know what they are getting themselves into. Yeah, that's my opinion. Thank you very much.
Dr. Maurice, you're muted.
Sorry about that. Iria, thank you very much. You've underscored the importance of responsive policy making and creating that enabling environment, but you've also called for an innovation hub that would connect investors to possible finances to finance these innovators. I believe that I can hand over to Ms. Natalie Jabangwe to ask her the question. Ms. Jabangwe, you've been at the heart of some of the tools that the informal economy, cash. Tell us, is it as simple as that? Is it more cash? How do we get affordable cash into the hands of the innovators in the informal economy? What is needed? So may I give you 2 minutes to respond to that, please? Thank you, Natalie. Over.
Thank you very much indeed. Esteemed UNDP Administrator, Honorable Minister, Madam Director, Ahuna Eziokana, Honorable Wamkele Mene, thank you very much indeed for giving me this time and opportunity and for asking your question. 5 years ago on the African continent, it probably would have been all about cash. But things have changed dynamically because of digitization. From the GSMA 2021 report, we now have about 1.2 billion mobile money accounts globally. And if I look at the global trends and pick a country like the United Kingdom, for example, for the first time, 50% of all payments have been electronic, and this has happened in 2020 during the pandemic. Cash payments in the UK are now only accounting for about 23%. And digitization within the last 2 years has made a stark difference. But let's bring it home and closer to Africa and see what has been happening, because this is the continent of the leapfroggers. And this is the continent, since it is the human cradle of creation, has always been at the center of advancement. And particularly in this 21st century, and not so surprisingly, at the advancement of digitization. We have today on the Africa continent making up 60% of all the mobile money accounts that are registered globally. That accounts to 548 million accounts. During this COVID-19 pandemic, we have had 43% additional customers being registered on the African continent. Mobile money accounts have risen from about 200 million in 2019 to 300 million in 2020, and 43% of those have been attributed to on the Africa continent. As if that was not enough, we have seen that remittances on the Africa continent year 2020 went up 65% as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic. If there was any continent on the universe that was able to accelerate and drive FDI at accelerated pace, it was because of digitization and mobile money accounts and the acceleration we've seen on international remittances. If we look at not only the number of registered accounts, but active accounts on digitization and the transaction volumes on digitization and transaction values on digitization, at least double digit of those have come out of North Africa and Sub-Saharan Africa. When you look at the 310 digital payments installations that are available globally, 65% of those are in Sub-Saharan Africa. The continent of Africa has never been readier than it is today in terms of cash liquidity on account of digitization. And therefore, when you ask Honorable Administrator Achim Steiner, what is the oxygen that is required to enable young people, to enable this continent to drive trade in the way that Honorable Minister Ursula aptly put it, we're really looking at the ability of the data that has been provided from digitization to be converged by financial services platforms so that we can address the issue of credit, we can address the issue of access to cash. We want to be able to see financiers come to the fore, and if we forecast and if we look at what will make a difference on the AFCFTA that Honorable Mene spoke about, if we bring together a convergence of a platform and of an ecosystem that brings financiers, that brings bankers, that brings insurers, that brings investment banks, that also brought together microfinance institutions and was able to leverage on the data that we're talking about that has been harnessed on the African continent because of digitization, we are well placed to be able to bring down the risk of default for financial services and access to credit on the Africa continent. In places where digitization is high, it has been noted that the default on credit has come down at least 95% as a result of digitization. Credit that is provided to customers over a digital platform only has a risk of about 1.5%, it has been seen. So underpinned by data, we have an opportunity to actually make an absolute difference on the continent. Honorable Minister, you also spoke about the demographic dividend that the Africa continent has as a leverage. By 2050, Africa will have the largest population in terms of young people on the continent, but also the fastest growing in terms of population and the largest population by all means across all continents universally. And so if we marry digitization, data, digital platforms We need not to talk necessarily about cash, but we need to start talking about a shared economy. We need to start talking about shared liquidity. And this is the impetus of the Africa Free Continental Trade Area Agreement. When we can come together and we can harness our resources. Somebody asked the question about how can we reach the rural areas. We do not have a much better tool today than digitization, than telco capability and mobile money accounts that allows us to be able to reach people in the rural areas in a more efficient way than we've ever been able to see before. And so I think it's not just about cash. I think it's now starting to talk about how do we harness liquidity? How do we use the policies such as the AFCFTA to be able to actually galvanize, accelerate, and go much quicker? Cash, yes, but I think digitization and the innovation that Iria talked about, harnessing those ecosystems and creating a platform where policymakers can also come together, but where young innovators do not wait for policymakers to make a difference, but where they can be the change that they require to see, and they can lobby for themselves and go ahead of the curve and make sure that they get what they want to get. I think cash will not necessarily be what we need, but I think digitization is something that will really make a difference on this continent. May I say in closing, and humbly so, and maybe without being so bullish, it is possible that because of digitization, Africa did cut the risk of the number of COVID cases that we have been able to experience on the continent. Thank you very much indeed.
You're muted, Dr. Erika.
Sorry. Thank you very much, Natalie. May I direct the last question to Mr. Vidal Kenmo? Mr. Kenmo, your brand, Choose by Vidal, is a testament to what innovation does with digital technologies. You don't have a physical store and you're only present online, and you are creating world-class shoes and are eyeing the African market for expansion. What will it take for you to grow, to reach larger industrial scale? Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Erika, and thank you for having me today. Good afternoon to everyone, Honorable Minister, all the Secretary General. Thank you. I believe in order for me or for the business that I run, Choose by Vidal, to expand, we need more communication. And I believe Minister Owusu mentioned that. It is actually a great tool when it comes to the business that I do. Because as I mentioned in my report with the UNDP a few months ago, the shoes that we make from here, from Douala, Cameroon, a good percentage of that is being exported overseas. Because obviously in Europe or in America, people are quite interested in handmade shoes, but we have not been able to reach them. A lot of people don't know about Shoes by Vidal. I believe they don't know about it in Kenya or in Ghana or even in my nearest country, neighboring country in Nigeria. Really, communication is the key. Whether it's digital communication using social media platform or actually having it in a banner of a magazine on an airplane, that could definitely be a help. So, but I believe communication is one of the solutions. And the second and last that I can think of when it comes to solution to broaden and to expand this business will be what all of you have already mentioned, a hub, really a hub. Custom is quite expensive in other countries. So when I have people in Ivory Coast or Nigeria or Ghana contacting me because they want a pair of shoes and a pair of my design, which they would not be able to find anywhere else. So they can only come to Choose by Vidal. But then you look at the shipping cost and the custom cost, which usually are more expensive than the shoe itself. It's not a good point. It doesn't really encourage the market. So there should be a way, and that's really independent to me. It comes to the government, to different various governments and shipping agency, DHL, UPS, FedEx, and all the rest of them. that you already know. If we can have e-commerce platform for young entrepreneurs or for startups, where we can actually sell and ship products at a lower cost, that would definitely help. So that's my input on your question. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Kenmo. I am now going to hand over to the administrator, Mr. Steiner, sir. You've heard these presentations, the perspectives from our innovators on the ground, working to make things happen, from a finance sector leader working on bringing resources to the informal sector, from the Honorable Minister in Ghana on national level action in support for innovation on a digitalization perspective, and also from the SG on how this all ties into potential utilization for One Africa. May I humbly ask what your reflections are before you leave? Thank you.
Thank you, Erica. And I first of all want to thank you all for your fascinating contributions. I said at the beginning that I thought this panel is one that even in this challenging moment is ultimately about thinking forward, about our bringing an element of perspective, both on the seriousness of the situation right now, but also on the prospects that lie ahead of us. And so much depends, first of all, on realizing the potential. And my dear colleague Juan spoke to the fact that in having this continental free trade area emerge now as a driver, it opens up the eyes both of African citizens, but also of many who want to trade with Africa. And to Vidal's point also just now, that there is an extraordinary quantitative and increasingly also platform prospect in which trade can become something that can not only be a sort of elusive horizon out there. If only one could connect to the market, all this innovation could thrive. No, we have to build, first of all, an economic platform. Secondly, as the minister also said, the countries on the African continent have been most successful, indeed anywhere in the world, are ones that took what I would refer to as an ecosystem approach. It's not just the fiber optic cable. It's not just having access to a digital or internet connection or a smartphone. It is the ability to introduce into the syllabus in educational sectors the kind of skill sets that allow school leavers to enter the labor market, not having to almost start from scratch again to acquire a skill to be able to be competitive. It is about the financing environment that we heard Iria spoke about, and I think this is perhaps the greatest challenge, because banks clearly do not view startups as necessarily a safe investment proposition. But this is where we need hybrid solutions. Governments, national development finance institutions, national development banks, philanthropists. I mean, we can create the kind of financial support infrastructure that allows an idea to be tested. And these are not massive investments that are needed, but the obstruction or the barrier that the absence of such a system represents is absolute. And therefore we lose so much talent, we lose so many ideas, because that first phase, which needs an element of empathetic investment, let me put it that way, is simply not there. And government can step in here together with the private sector. Co-financing, co-underwriting, co-loaning. I mean, there are many ways to deal with this. Then I want to come to Natalie. And Natalie, it's lovely to see you. I mean, I am always in awe of how you in just a few minutes can, like a laser beam, zoom in on the things that are needed. And I think you put it in a very interesting way. Is cash going to be the constraint in the future, or is it actually that digital ecosystem? And in a sense, it speaks to both of the challenges in the short term right now, but also where, again, back to when we think of the role of government, government has a key role to play to fast track, fast forward, creating the regulatory, but also the technological infrastructure, the financial infrastructure to allow an economy that leverages digital in an effective way to move forward faster. COVID-19 has been a brutal accelerator, let's be honest. I mean, we have learned a lot, it has opened our eyes, but a great pain also in realizing what it means not to have these things in place and then having to scramble. And I think this is where we as UNDP, where the international community can also play its part in accompanying Africa as it builds that ecosystem, that infrastructure, the capabilities to help it pivot forward. What is it that stops us from saying, look, 50% of the world's population still don't have access to broadband and internet, roughly. Why don't we come out of this, traumatic phase of COVID-19 and make a commitment as an international community to halve that number in the next 5 years? It's perfectly doable in view of the kind of investments that are being made to stabilize economies. It's also not prohibitive. It just needs to be built into it. It is the DNA in part of a build forward better view. And we also need to find ways in which we can facilitate the interface between public sector and private sector. Clearly, there has been and will continue to always be a pendulum and a different set of perceptions about private ownership of key fundamental infrastructure in an economy and the responsibility of the government, the state, to provide public goods also to a society. I think we are learning very fast at the moment that in those societies where these are seen as countervailing forces, contradictory players in the marketplace, progress slows down. It is where we can reconcile fundamental rights, the rule of law, with an enabling environment for the private sector to bring both its entrepreneurial but also its financial and market acumen to a national development objective, such as the ones we have been discussing, that things can really go into breakthrough territory. And I think we've heard some amazing examples this morning. I already went on the internet just now, Vidal, to look at Shoes by Vidal. And I will continue to look at IREA and how kelp and livestock feeding. I wish IREA, you had spoken a bit more about the startup you are working with and others who basically are part of this extraordinary economy. All I want to say is, for us as UNDP, it's a privilege to work with so many of you that are leading these efforts, and it is for us a daily learning exercise and opportunity, because at the end of the day, we also have to change the lens with which we learn from within countries, from within communities, from within entrepreneurial and startup cultures. What is it that could work, and what does it take to make it work for everyone? Thank you so much. And forgive me if I in a minute have to slightly disappear because the next event is knocking on my virtual door. But it's been a fantastic session. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Achim Steiner, Administrator. It has been a privilege to have you on the panel. We really look forward to continuing our conversations as part of the Istanbul Innovation Day 2021. And of course, we look forward to building forward better. Thank you very much, sir. I think as part of the next phase of this dialogue, I would like to humbly ask for the panelists to provide their last parting reflections. If I may start with Honorable Minister Owusu Ekuful. May I give you 2 minutes to provide your last high-level parting shot? Thank you. Okay, it seems like I've lost the feed. Honorable Minister? May I perhaps take this opportunity to then hand over to our UNDP Director, Ms. Ahuna Eziakonwa. Your keynote reflections, ma'am.
Thank you, moderator, and thank you so much for all those who contributed. Natalie, also good to see you. And I just wish we had more time to hear from you, from Iria, from Vidal, because this is, at the end of the day, what it's all about, right? Is tapping into that experience and that knowledge that enables us to think a bit more clearly and smartly about how we create development programs and policies to influence the innovation environment. So I have just two sort of overarching points in my reflection here in everyone's delivery here. The first one is that we need to listen more. And by we, I really mean us who are on the front lines of development and policy making. We need to listen more to the innovators who are in the trenches and whose experience really generate the evidence that we need to course correct. So creating more platforms such as this one, where we give time and more time to those with this experience to tell us exactly what it will take. And, you know, just in a short time, Iria, Natalie and Vidal were able to write a book on what we need to do differently and what we could do to facilitate this. So that is really critical. And the second overarching point, and of course, doing that in front of government officials also, as we heard from the minister from Ghana, facilitating that communication so that innovators also hear what government is struggling with and how they are trying to become the enablers for innovation. I think really this exchange is important. My second point is about the impact that all of this has on the African confidence. You know, we should not take this for granted, you know, because this is a continent that has been subjected to a mindset and a mind frame of, you know, you have to receive from outside to make a difference. And I think what we heard today, particularly from the minister, who made the point that all of these applications in the multiple sectors are homegrown. And we as UNDP, we've been really using our platform to showcase homegrown solutions on development that are innovative on the continent. Now, what that says is really that Africa can, and Africa's got what it takes. And it really challenges this notion that development is based on expertise from outside. We have the expertise on the inside. And when we understand this, it changes the way we position a development program in a place. And that's why our accelerator labs, which you're part of, Dr. Maurice, is a testament. It really serves as testimony to UNDP's belief that finally we begin to mine the knowledge from within the countries for transformation. And I think this validates that approach. So big lessons from this conversation, and we will certainly take up some of those challenges that are put on the table by our innovators. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Ahuna Eziakonwa, for those parting high-level reflections, which we will most certainly take note of. We appear to have run out of time, and we haven't really gone to the Q&A session, but I see that many of the questions have already been addressed online. Unfortunately, His Excellency Mene has already left, and quite a few of those questions were directed to him. But what I may humbly request our participants and those online who do have questions to please leave your details in the Q&A. We will reach out to you. Also, the presentations. There's been a very popular demand for the presentations. The presentations will also be made available. I believe Ms. Eziokonwa has really summarized the discussions beautifully. I want to give the panelists that are online still to just provide one-liners before we conclude the session, starting with Ms. Jabangwe. Ms. Jabangwe, your 1 minute, please.
Thank you. I would like to close by saying necessity is the mother of all invention. When we have so much that we have need of in Africa, it's a great opportunity for us to be able to innovate on the back of the problems that we have to drive dynamic and innovative solutions. Thank you.
Iria, over to you for your 1 minute reflection, please.
Thank you so much. Okay, I just want to say innovation is the backbone of every nation's economy. And I'm quite happy to know that a lot of stakeholders are doing so much just to make sure that we improve innovation, we support innovators, we push innovation to accelerate Africa, forward. Thank you.
Thank you very much, everybody. As a parting and in summary, I'd like to conclude by saying that this discussion has been much like selecting colorful threads to include in a tapestry one is weaving in an old-fashioned loom. Every selection is deliberate, unhurried, and creative with the overall project in mind. So today's conversations, the RBA's contributions to the informal economy, the One Africa market and innovation are individual strands to be selected and interwoven with the rest of the threads to create a bigger tapestry of a world for people, for prosperity, and for the planet that we would want. May I take this humble opportunity to thank everybody who has invested the time to join these conversations as a panelist, as a participant, and a listener, and also to the organizers, for without you, our tapestry would not have been complete. That's it for me. Thank you very much, everybody, for joining the conversations. Thank you, and over.